Hi, good evening, everyone. I am McKenna. I'm the owner of Murder by the Book in Houston, Texas, and we're excited to have another virtual event tonight. This is our May Agora and Polis night. We have been doing one of these a month with this great press and hope to continue those throughout the summer. Tonight, we're going to be joined by Chantel Osman, who is the editor at Agora, as well as Sung Jae Woo and Andrea J Johnson. So before we get them introduced and we start this talk, I will mention that we do these events many, many times a week. And if you want the full event listing, you can visit murderbooks.com for everything that is upcoming. We also have our subscription boxes, which can be found at murderbythebox.com or on our website. Our May Cozy and Best of the Month subscriptions will be going out later this week. So if you're a subscriber, check your mailbox for those soon. I guess that's it, and it's quick tonight. I just got rained on the way home, hence the hair and a little bit more frazzled than normal. So I'm going to go ahead and get introductions underway, and so I can sit back and enjoy this talk. So I'm going to start with our guest moderator tonight. Many of you have already seen her on here for some of our previous Agora Polis nights, but we're happy to have Chantel Osman back with us. Hi, Chantel.
Hi.
So good to see you. I love your backdrop. Is it new?
No, it's not. That's actually my bookshelf. So,
Nice, nice. It looks fantastic. It
thank
looks
you.
great. All right, so Chantel Osman is the editor of Agora, an imprint of Polis books, which focuses on crime fiction and unique social and cultural themes. Books she has edited have been nominated for multiple Edgar Anthony, Lefty, Macavity, and Strand Critics Awards. She was named a Publishers Weekly Rising Star honoree in 2020 and a guest of honor at Left Coast Crime in 2016. And again, thank you for being here and thanks for doing the interview
Oh, it's
tonight.
my pleasure. Thank you for hosting us.
Of course, always a pleasure. All right, we're also joined by Sung Jae Woo. Good evening.
Hello.
Thanks for being here. So, Sung Jae Woo, Soft School Counterpoint. He's also published a half dozen personal essays in the New York Times, and a few months back, the weekly Modern Love podcast featured a performance of his piece. Sung was born in Seoul, South Korea, and is married and lives in Washington, New Jersey. He's here tonight to talk about his latest release, which is the first in a series, Skin Deep. So can't wait to hear more about that. And then last but not least, we have Andrea J Johnson. She is a freelance entertainment writer for the women's lifestyle website Pop Sugar. Her love for insider gossip has led her to take real-life headlines and turn them into mind-bending mysteries. In addition to being a writer, Andrea is a certified shorthand reporter for the state of California and a member of the National Court Reporters Association. She currently resides on the Delmarva Peninsula near the Chesapeake and Delaware Bays, which is the backdrop for her new series. And her brand new book is Poetic Justice. Thank you for being here.
Thank you so much for having me, McKenna. This is a pleasure.
Well, I am looking forward to the discussion. I'm going to remove myself from the screen and I will be back on in a little bit. If you have questions as a viewer, make sure to put them in the live chat on YouTube or in the comments here on Facebook. I've also just dropped a link in the comments where there's more information about the authors, their books, as well as a link to order them from Murder by the Book. Okay, you guys have fun.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, McKenna. All right, everybody. So happy Monday. I'm so glad it's Monday and all of our tech is working and everything is going well so far, knock on wood. I wanted to get started by making you both just give us a 1 to 2, just really brief description of the book in case people in the audience haven't read it, just so they have a little bit of background before we go into, the hows, whys, and the background and what inspired you to write them. So, Andrea, we'll start with you. Just a brief description of Poetic Justice.
Sure. Poetic Justice is the first in what is now a 2-book series about a shorthand stenographer, a trial stenographer, who basically decides to take the law in her own hands when she sees a trial gone wrong. And each book basically involves a trial of some kind. And it seems at first that the story is about the trial, but it ends up being a murder that takes on the community. And of course, Victoria is the amateur sleuth that jumps in and tries to solve things using her skills as a stenographer. I was obviously inspired to write the series because that was my profession at one time. And I thought it would make a beautiful, cozy slash legal thriller situation, sort of a foot in both worlds, where you had an amateur sleuth, but you had the characters that you often see in a legal thriller and the tension brought on by the law and those issues, making the story a little bit more grander in scope than your typical cozy, which is usually small town based. So,
well, wonderful. We'll get into some of those interesting issues in a little bit. Sung, a brief description of Skin Deep from you.
Sure. Skin Deep is also a first in a series of, I guess, at least 2 books, because I have to write another one. But as far as this one is concerned, it is the introduction of Siobhan O'Brien. She is the heroine of the series, and she used to be a newspaper reporter way back, but then now she is an assistant detective. She works with Ed Baker in the Ed Baker Investigative Agency as a private investigator. But what happens is she finds her boss dead, and it turns out that he didn't have anyone else, so he bestows the agency to her. And she's very green with all of this, and she doesn't even know if she wants to continue on. But then an old friend comes by and asks if she can find her daughter who is missing from her college dorm. And that's the story. The main, I guess, hook is Siobhan O'Brien may sound like an Irish American name, but she's actually Korean American. She was adopted by her parents, who are Nordic and Irish.
It's great. All right. So, Sung, Skin Deep is a significant departure for you. As we heard in your bio, you're the author of 2 rather more literary novels. So what made you decide to pursue a mystery, and not only just a mystery, but a more traditional mystery at that?
I guess, the reason why I went the traditional route is, it's like there's a framework that I can lean on, which I think I really needed, because I did not really know what I was doing. Not to say that I ever know what I'm doing at all, really, with anything that I write. I really don't. But especially with this one, I needed some help because there is like a tradition to be followed, and it was very good to follow, just like the blueprint that's been laid out before me, but still try to make it my own. I mean, the reason why I ended up writing this book is because, truth be told, I always wanted to write a mystery novel. Way back when, even when I was a senior in college, which now dates back a quarter of a century, really. In my senior year, I remember I still have the file on my computer of my first attempt at a mystery novel, and I really wanted to write one because I loved reading them. I was totally in love, especially with Dick Francis. I loved his horse racing novels of intrigue, and a big fan of Robert B. Parker and all of the Spencer series. I must have gone through on one summer like 20 of them. I mean, just one after the other, and his characters were so distinct. And the thing that I was probably most afraid of was, especially reading the Parker novels, was like a big part of this genre, at least from what I read, is banter. Like, you got to have really good banter in order to make this work. And certainly the Spencer novels were a really good example for me to kind of go back on. And lastly, Sue Grafton was, of course, a big influence. I took apart A's for Alibi, like chapter by chapter, or sometimes sentence by sentence, to see how she did what she did. And it was a really wonderful guide because it was her first, Kinsey novel. And I was like, hey, I can use this.
Well, then I guess the more appropriate question should have been, well, what took you so long to go to the mystery? If this was something that you've always liked and always read and had drafts of on your college computer, what make you go to the literary side first and then kind of circle back to what seems to be your passion?
Yeah. Well, I mean, I did go for an MFA back in the early 2000s. And I guess what it is a lot of authors, when they start out with their first book, end up writing like the autobiographical memoirish, which actually is fiction or whatever. Write what you know type of thing. So I think I had to get that out of my system first. And when I did, at that point, I do remember ruminating about trying to do this, but I think I just needed more experience. So I had to write a second book that was not this that I wanted to write. But eventually I got around to it. So I'm very glad that I did. But yes, I the other thing is I'm just slow.
Well, I'm glad that you got around to it because I just love Siobhan, and it's a great book, and we'll talk more about her in a minute. But going back over to Poetic Justice, which is your debut novel, so kind of the same question: what made you gravitate toward a more traditional mystery? Especially, like you said, you were influenced by the fact that it's kind of a combination of traditional. It takes some of the legal thriller elements and applies them to a traditional mystery, but what made you decide to go the traditional mystery route as opposed to, maybe doing the legal thriller instead, which you could have easily done with the same framework?
Well, the story that I had in mind to tell was based on a snippet of an instance that I had heard from another stenographer. And that particular impetus for the story didn't feel like it lent itself to a full thriller in the way that we think of thrillers, because often we think of thrillers as stories where we kind of already know who the killer is, or at least we have a strong inkling, and it's more about, well, why did they do it as opposed to who did it? And I really wanted to tell a whodunit story, specifically because the instance I framed the story around was an instance where a police officer opens evidence on the stand and it's not what he expects it to be. And that felt very Agatha Christie, very, Blaise Clement, very traditional mystery type situation. And building from there, I figured that I needed to adhere to a genre that allowed for a community collaboration on the actual unfolding of the murder part of the mystery, because there's two mysteries in Poetic Justice. There's why was this evidence missing, who did it, and why did they do it, as well as the murder that follows, who did it, and why did they do it. So I wanted them to be able to stack on top of each other, but also have Victoria be able to go to the people in the community to help her, because she is an amateur sleuth and she knows the law to a degree, but she doesn't know it in the way to actually solve the mystery like perhaps a lawyer or detective would. So I didn't want to quite go the legal thriller realm. I wanted to do something that was a little bit more accessible to the audience.
No, that's great. And I think that I find so often with writers, and I know with my own writing, that it's just that one thing, that one snippet, like you're saying, the opening of the evidence and not seeing that it's what she expected it, what the person on the stand expected it to be. And such a small kernel can turn into, such a huge story, because you have to answer that question. And it's like overhearing a conversation, right? And you just have to know what happened around it to get that person to say that thing. And as a writer, I think it's so much fun that we can actually figure out that circumstance for ourselves. But I love, one of my favorite things about debut novelists is the process. And I'm curious, you gave us that kernel, but how closely would you say that your final draft of Poetic Justice adheres to your initial vision for it? Did things change a lot along the way since this was your first novel? Does it basically resemble the same thing you started?
It does not resemble the same thing I started, but I think that has less to do with me being a debut novelist and more to do with the process under which it was written. I've actually written a few books that have not been published prior to Poetic Justice that were in different genres. This particular book was a mystery, and I felt that mysteries are so complex. You're building a puzzle that the audience plays along with, that I needed assistance. So, like Sung, I went to graduate school and got my MFA. And so this book was written during my MFA process. So there were a lot of fingers in the pie. So it doesn't match my initial vision because I had a lot of people giving me feedback. And since it was an assignment for part of the process, I had to incorporate some of that. And after a while, it was so much a part of the story that I couldn't turn left. Even though I wanted to turn left, I had to just keep trucking down the road. So it is drastically different. I was seeing something much more funny, much more light, much more like Donna Andrews' books.
Got it.
And this is a much darker book in the sense that it's serious, it's grounded in reality. There are issues of multicultural issues of racism and prejudice and sexism in it. So it's more like Blaise Clement. If you're a cozy mystery reader and you really know your stuff, Donna Andrews is really light. She's on one end of the scale, and Blaise Clement is on the other. Even though Blaise Clement's titles are really funny and light, her stories deal with things like discrimination against the LGBTQA plus community. She really digs in. And so I ended up doing a lot of that with my story.
Well, and that's actually why I thought you two would be such a great team together for this event, because I think both of your books kind of straddle that line. There's definitely humor in both, and there's definitely issues, and you've reframed a traditional mystery, both of you, in different ways, which I think is really exciting. And one of the reasons that I love both of your books are your very, very unique protagonists. Like, Siobhan is not your typical PI by any means, from her name to, her adoptee status to just the way that she handles situations. She's very relatable as a female early middle-aged protagonist, and it's not quite as I think that both of your protagonists are actually a little bit more grounded in reality than a lot of traditional or cozy protagonists are, where there just seems to be an extreme personality there or something. They're very relatable and down to earth despite being extremely unique. And of course, Victoria is a court stenographer turned amateur sleuth who also has aquaphobia. There's so much in both of your protagonists. So I'm curious for both of you, and whoever wants to take it first, what went into crafting these very, very unique characters?
Would you like to go first, Andrea?
Sure. As I mentioned, this storyline, the actual, I guess you could say, premise or hook of the book, actually came from a real case, not a case that I handled as a stenographer, but a real case. So I wanted to build a character who would look as if they couldn't handle the weight of the circumstances into which they were being thrust. So my particular character has a built-in phobia. She's afraid of water, but of course she lives in a seaside town. She is adopted, so she has a mother who smothers her, and she's trying to do this investigation, yet her mother is constantly on her back about not wanting her to get involved. So I made sure that I had a character who, and she's actually, she's physically small as well. And she's in a profession where she's supposed to be seen and not heard. So I try to play, in the characterization, I tried to play the opposite of her circumstances. Even though she's small, she's strong. Even though she is told to be silent at all times and she has a strong inner life, she ends up being the voice of reason when she walks into a room. So I try to play with differences and opposites with my character. And hopefully that continues to shine through as we move into the second book in the series. And the story is a little bit different, where she's less the centerpiece and more the savior.
Well, and I think that's very true of the book. I particularly attached to the fact, like we were discussing the aquaphobia, and I don't think it's really giving anything away. But when we first meet your protagonist, basically what had happened was she was bullied and almost drowned, and it was high school, right? And we first meet the protagonist when she's reconfronting this bully and this incident that she thought was behind her by far in the courtroom during her job. So all of those things that you were just talking about, being seen and not heard, having these phobias, all of that was really illustrated in the first scenes. So we can definitely see that growth and that change and contrast throughout the book. And I just thought that was so interesting, the way that you did that. Oh, I think we lost Andrea somehow. I guess the compliment was too much for her. You're going to have to carry this all by yourself. No,
Oh my goodness.
I'm sure she'll be right back. I'm sure McKenna will get her right back in. But while she's away, why don't you talk a little bit about Siobhan and how you ended up with a Korean-American adoptee with an Irish name who's a struggling PI who's not really sure where she's going with things.
I can certainly speak to where the germ of the idea came from of having Siobhan be an transracial adoptee. And that's because on my first book tour for my first book out in San Francisco, I met a group of Korean adoptees who were in a very similar situation as Siobhan, where the parents were not of their race, usually white folks. And that's the first time I actually met a group like that. And I never really forgot that encounter. So, just imagining that kind of an upbringing, you can just kind of see that would be fraught with all sorts of conflict and inner conflict and drama. So, I think that's the reason why I chose Siobhan to be in that situation. As far as making her be unsure of being able to carry on this agency by herself, that was an easy thing for me to do, because that's the way I felt about writing the book. Like, can I actually write this book? And can I actually get into the head of a detective? And made perfect sense for her to have all these doubts, because I was full of doubts myself. So all the angst and Siobhan feels in this book are just mine as I was wading through this manuscript and how to bring this to an appropriate and logical conclusion. All of that was just kind of put in there with my own issues, I suppose you could say.
Well, and I'll ask you kind of similarly, since this was your first mystery, or maybe, your second or third, but your actual first, published mystery. First of all, what did you find easier or harder between writing the mystery and your prior books? Like, what were the major differences other than the actual, rule structure? And then the other thing, I'll echo the question that I asked before, which is, did your final draft resemble what you started out to make it, or did it change and evolve dramatically throughout your process?
Um, I'm trying to remember. It's been a while now of what the book used to look like. Um, I do remember. Initially I thought I could actually write this book in one location, but then it became apparent that that I was going to have another locale, if no other reason, just for variety, because I was just kind of sick and tired of being at the school. So. And then, that was actually a really good, it was a good move to make, because it let me explore this whole other mystery that I didn't really even consider until it just kind of bloomed on its own. Yeah, and it was kind of nice to be able to just kind of, like, what was it? Ed Doctorow, who was at NYU for a while. His advice always was like writing is like going down a country road at night and in a car, and all you need to do is just be able to see what's in front of you with your headlights. That's it. And I kind of follow that as much as I can. You don't have to know what's at the end, but if you can just see a little bit further ahead, it's going to work out okay. So that's, like, I think the first half of the book, where it takes place in the college, that was very much like written out, outline form and stuff. But the latter half of it was far more, shall we say, exploratory, I suppose. Yeah.
Well, since you brought it up, I was actually, another reason that I thought the two of you were such a great pair for this is because of your locations. You've obviously both been influenced by places that you know well. Sung with upstate New York, and then the Delaware Bay area. Both settings really are smaller towns, which is rather typical for a traditional mystery. But other than just familiarity, what drew you to choosing these locations rather than setting it in a major city or somewhere a little bit more widely recognizable? Andrea, shall we start with you?
Sure. Well, I knew that I needed a small town layout, so I figured it would be best to work with one that I could basically map out from my own vision almost. Now, the story takes place in what is known as Bickerton, Delaware, which is actually a fictional place, but it is a amalgamation of, let's say, Georgetown, Delaware, and Lewis, Delaware, and Rehoboth Beach, and a couple of other places kind of glommed all together. But the reason that I chose Delaware as opposed to a more, memorable or familiar location to people at large is because there aren't many stories that are set in Delaware, and I thought that would be one way to make the story unique. And then again, a more practical reason is a lot of my story is based on legal issues, and I didn't want to get too far away from Delaware because I'm very familiar with legal matters, how they play out in that state. Although I no longer live in that state and I've worked in others, that's the one that I'm most familiar with. So several reasons played into that.
Very interesting. Sung?
For me, it was just familiarity more than anything else. And for me to easily replace the same location or the same buildings with just different names, but in my head, I know where they are and what they are. So the first part of the book takes place in Athena, New York, upstate New York. But Athena is Ithaca. It's where I went to school. So, I mean, the school, all of it. I just change the street names here and there, change it from, green to brown.
Well, and just to interrupt you for 1 second, for anybody watching, Sung's book, the first part of the mystery takes place at what used to be an all-women's college that has recently gone co-ed, that's upstate. And then the second part of the book, the investigation leads to a spa/yoga meditation retreat. Also upstate. So these are the two locations that we're discussing. So please continue. So I just wanted to give them a little background.
Well, thank you. Yeah. And then the yoga retreat is, it's set in this fictional town of Hawthorne, New York, but it's actually Lenox, Massachusetts. It's where there's this wonderful yoga center, Kripalu, is up there. And it's a place that my wife and I visit often. So, again,
But I'm sure it's quite different from the experience of Siobhan in the book.
Is it? Like I have to tell you, like I even use some of that history there because even though Kripalu is this wonderful place now, back in the old days, like it was an ashram led by like one yogi, and like the guy, let's just say that in present times he would have been me too, like in a very big way. So. Some of that is in the book as is. Again, I just changed the names to some degree, but some of the history is there. So yeah, I think just out of maybe just laziness on my part is why I did what I did.
Well, I think it's so interesting talking to both of you and how you have taken so many of the traditional / cozy tropes, a woman with a whatever particular niche job or background, and then a small town, there are those formulas, profession plus small town plus sidekicks plus, romantic interest. But neither of your books resemble any other book that I've read in the genre. And I think one of the interesting things that both of you did was, in choosing your genre and going more traditional, you opted not to do, say, like a police procedural or a legal thriller. But at the same time, so your protagonists have the ability to, how shall I put this, be a little bit more independent. They don't necessarily have to follow the law or the rules. And yet, Sung has chosen a PI, which is a profession that is licensed and does have certain things that they have to adhere to. And Andrea has chosen a court stenographer. So there are a lot of legal trappings, despite neither of these being like a typical police detective or officer or something. What kind of made you not just go totally, complete amateur sleuth? I mean, in a sense, Victoria is an amateur sleuth, but she's still working with the legal system. And she's also working in certain instances with the police. And of course, Siobhan is a licensed PI. So what was that balance there? And what tipped you away from doing either complete amateur or making them a police officer or other legal official?
Well, I think it really, for me, just went back to that idea that was already brought up by Sung, writing what you know. I thought that I had a unique angle because you see a lot of cozies, and I keep using the word cozies because in my mind, the story is a cozy, even though it has trappings of other genres. Mm-hmm. But most cozies are, like you're saying, professions that are far afield from the law. And I thought perhaps that I had something unique to bring because I hadn't seen a cozy that used a trial stenographer. And I guess I haven't actually stopped to say what a trial stenographer is. That's the person who sits in the courtroom and takes the verbatim dictation of the proceeding. And although you may have a few cozies out there with secretaries or admin assistants or even Girl Fridays, I hadn't really seen one with that specific profession. And so I thought that was an opportunity to do something new and play with some things that hadn't been seen before. This idea of someone who's working with the law, but doesn't really have any powers of a law enforcement person, but has all the resources at the same time. So that makes them a rather savvy amateur sleuth as it goes. So for me, it was really just a matter of writing what I know and trying to take a chance on doing something that hadn't been seen before.
Interesting. Yeah, no, I haven't seen anything like Victoria, and that's why I'm so glad that I got to work with you and edit that. Sung, what about you? Why PI?
I guess I chose the PI because it's like what I've been reading, or that was like my blueprint, right? Whether it be Spencer or this other book, actually. It was a book titled The Scent of Blood, written by Raymond Miller, which is, I'm sure nobody has read this book, but it was actually written by, it's a nom de plume. So, but it's a book written by a professor that I knew. And that was also a PI. And I liked the fact that he integrated a lot of like writings. He was a writing professor. So he made the PI like somebody who knows a lot about literature and who was, I think, at one point had the desire to be a poet. So having a poet turn into a PI, that was very interesting to me. So then I thought, well, I know what it's like to be Korean, so definitely wanted to have my protagonist be Korean. I don't always write books or even short stories where a character, the protagonist is Korean, but almost always, if the protagonist is not Korean, somebody else is in the story, whether it be an ancillary character or whatever. It just kind of lets me find my footing in the story in some way. But I mean, I think it just made sense to me to have Siobhan be the PI because it gives her a reason to be an investigator, right? So my main thing was to just make her as green as possible. That she was just doesn't really know what she's doing, because that's always interesting because it's like an origin story, right?
Yeah, no, I love that. And I, you've both, Andrea said this earlier and you kind of brought it up right now. And for the audience who isn't aware, Skin Deep does explore a lot of, even though it's definitely lighthearted 90% of the time, but it definitely explores issues of not only feminist issues, but issues of beauty and the toxic nature of body image, as well as a bunch of other issues. And you mentioned earlier, Andrea, that you were talking about larger issues of race, culture. You both have protagonists who are adoptees. How conscious was the effort to incorporate, shall we say, social issues into what traditionally is a more lighthearted genre? And both of you do it so seamlessly. Like, neither one of you have that. It's so easy to go into that neon sign, like, here is the moral of the book. Here is, an issue that I am trying to discuss. And both of you do it so seamlessly. That's why I'm wondering how conscious it was, or if it was just something that was so important to you that it came out on the page.
Well, I guess I should censor myself here, but we're among friends, so I won't. I think I wrote an article once about how to write characters of color, and one of the things that I wrote about in that article was this idea that, and we've all had this conversation, and this is the thing I'm hesitant to talk about, is that when we read a book, our thoughts are by default that the character we are reading is a white person, most likely a white cisgender male. And I don't want to say there's anything wrong with that or there's anything good about it. I'm just saying that that's usually what happens. And so as a person who's absolutely not that, my default when I live in life is something that's absolutely different. And so I wanted to go to the page forcing, but not forcing, because you want to be kind to your reader, but essentially forcing my reader not to switch on that default, to really have to think about who each character is. And part of that, the onus was on me. I had to sit down and make sure that I was giving skin color or eye color or some kind of hint, whether it be the person's name or the accent that they're using or the clothes that they wear, that give a little hint to the fact that they may be different than the default. And by doing that, some of the things things being motivations, goals and motivations and conflicts between characters started to shift and change so that they were very much more like life, very real, that, you know, you sometimes just do judge a book by their cover. And sometimes that cover is the fact that the cover is brown or black or whatever it may be. And so for me, it was intentional at first, but also as I began to write, things began to snowball. And I'm glad that you're saying that that turned out for the better, because I think that although some of the lightheartedness that I may have initially have wanted or thought about when I came up with the premise is lost, I think there's a lot more gained, because my book does definitively have a theme, and it does definitively say something about culture and race and gender. So yeah, I don't know what else to say about that, because I'm trying to tiptoe around
no,
the
it's
obvious,
okay.
but
Yeah, no, I think
are.
that's wonderful. And that's part of why, I mean, that's part of why I love both of your books and why I could not wait to acquire them and bring them into the world. Because to be honest with you, I'm as tired of the cisgender white male trope as everybody else is. And I loved that I was reading something different and a perspective I hadn't seen, or somebody, you know, that I often don't see on the page. And it was so welcome. And it did, I hope it causes a lot of readers to think different things and see through a different viewpoint, because that's what's great about reading, is you can learn so much through somebody else's eyes. Sung, what about you and your themes in the book?
You know, I never even thought about the fact that I was writing some kind of a viewpoint on beauty, but definitely when I look back on the book, it plays a very large part. And I've always found beauty to be an interesting concept, just because, you know, I mean, there is like the initial thing of, I mean, everyone likes beautiful things, whether it be people or paintings or objects or vases or whatever. But then there's always like that kind of, I don't know, at least for me, like there's like that guilt that you feel when, because you feel kind of vacuous and you feel like, you know, like we are supposed to be better than just this, right? This shouldn't be this important, and it really isn't. But at the same time, it's hard to ignore. It's really out there, and it certainly is out there in the culture in every way. I mean, even though I think we try to make, I don't know, make it less important, it certainly does rule quite a bit of just about everything. So I'm glad I was able to write about it. But I have to tell you, I mean, that was never my agenda. It just happened, and all really happened because I think I was thinking about who the president of the Women's College would be now that it's in trouble. And it turns out to be, she used to be an like a fashion runway model. And then, you know, I mean, talk about like weirdly beautiful people. It's definitely the runway models, because usually they have such incredible, like eye-catching features, and yet like maybe not traditionally beautiful. I don't know, whatever. But when that germ of an idea came up, then I really just kind of got into it and thinking like, well, if this person was a runway model, then she probably has a whole lot of ideas about beauty. And then if she were heading what used to be an all women's college, like, and she used to be a student there, you know, years ago, like this was something worth mining. So just like a, you know, like a worm in a spiral that just kind of kept going and going until just kind of became this other thing. Yeah.
Well, like I said, I think both are fascinating in dealing with this in different ways. One quick thing before we open it up to questions. Both of you will eventually Deceptive Justice will be out. The second book in the Victoria Justice series will be out in November, and Sung's book next year. And I was wondering if you could give us a little hint as to what Victoria and Siobhan will be up to, their shenanigans in book 2. Just a couple of words of a hint so that we can get excited about it.
Well, Victoria comes up against a bomb threat that she may actually think is targeted toward her rather than the people around her. And there's a little bit more love in the second book.
Okay, and what happens with Siobhan? Where does she head off to?
Siobhan goes to the Pacific Northwest to another billionaire's house. And he is so rich that he owns an entire island. But the kicker is he's on his third wife, but all the ex-wives live with him. So 2 ex-wives plus the current wife plus all the children live in this Downton Abbey-like a fortress of a mansion. And the reason why Siobhan is there is because the head of the family believes that his son, who's going to inherit everything, he believes that his son is not his son and is an imposter.
Okay, I can't wait for both of these. And now I know that McKenna told me that we have some questions in the comments, which I cannot see. So, hello.
Hi again. Okay, we do. We have a couple questions. So I think this can apply to both. Since this will be a series, do you know how many books there will be, or do you just go with the flow as you write them? Let's start with you, Sung.
Yeah, well, I'm still writing the second one. So I'm about maybe 55% there. So
you realize you've got your editor on with this, and so
I know.
he's nervous. Okay, you're fine. Don't worry. I'm not mad at you.
So I'm thinking once this one is done, then I can think of more. But for now, I'm concentrating on this one. I hope there will be more.
So do I.
But, yeah.
How about you, Andrea?
Well, I intentionally started my protagonist fairly young. She says right at the beginning of the book that she's 25. And I did that because at the time that I initially came up with the story idea of Poetic Justice, I was reading the Southern Vampire Mystery series, better known today as the Sookie Stackhouse series. And one of the things that fascinated me about that particular series, I don't know if Charlaine Harris had it in mind to end that after a specific number of books, but Sookie actually ages over the course of those books, unlike someone like Stephanie Plum, who is, I guess, perpetually stuck in her mid-30s. So I deliberately wanted to start the story young so that whether the series was 4 books or 5 books or 12 books, there was an ability to have an arc where Victoria was able to move out of the house, because right now she lives with her mother, and find love and get married and maybe even look for her real parents, and have that same kind of arc that Sookie Stackhouse does over the course of those books. So I'm starting with the idea that it could be a long-running series, but obviously every book is self-contained and can be read as a standalone. So there you are.
Perfect. Okay, maybe actually Chantel can chime in a little bit on this, since she's obviously inside baseball with the publishing. Can we talk a little bit about the book covers?
Oh, absolutely. It's one of my favorite things to do. And I think that all 3 of us enjoyed the process in looking at and figuring out what the final covers and seeing the drafts and all of that would be. I mean, if you want to talk about them and the process with that, but for example, with Sung's, and in both, we knew that they would be series. So we wanted some sort of design that we could replace certain elements of as the series goes along, but they're branded to Siobhan or to Victoria. So like, for example, with Sung's, The primary color palette is and I wish the books are in the other room or I'd show a copy. Oh,
I'm pulling up the cover right now.
Great,
Hold it
thank
up.
you.
Yeah, I'm working on
Okay,
it.
so for songs, we actually use the colors of the Korean flag. We have the figures for the yoga retreat and also the skyline of the university town. And so there are certain things that we can replace, like for book 2, we'll probably change the color palette. It might be a different skyline, but these are all elements that we can adapt and change, but it will obviously be branded as a Siobhan O'Brien mystery. Did you have any words on the cover, Sung?
I love the target. It really draws your eyes. So I love that part. Yeah. Good cover.
And of course, with the Victoria's, the Poetic Justice series, Victoria Justice series, we wanted,
yeah, it's reversed, but that's the best I can
do. We wanted, first of all, I think that the color palette is fabulous, and book 2 and that Deceptive Justice has the same or very similar color palette. So if nothing else, we branded it with that. But we wanted, this one was actually a little bit more challenging because we're walking a line between being a cozier book and something that does have more thriller elements. I mean, we're dealing with things like bomb threats and that sort of thing. So we wanted it to be really, really iconic, but not necessarily quite as, illustrated as a lot of traditional mystery covers are. Thoughts on, because we've gone through several iterations, especially on book 2. Andrea, any thoughts?
Oh, yes, I would agree with that. One of the things that we talked about initially with Poetic Justice was, sort of this idea that it is a story with characters of all races, but the main character is a person of color, and I didn't want to hide that. So that's evident from the book's cover in the first book. And in the second book, as was explained, there's the tension is ramped up because we have a higher stakes situation with the bomb threat that could essentially destroy the whole community. So we wanted something that would continue to show that tension. And like she said, less illustrative, because a lot of cozy books tend to have bright colors and be very sort of bubbly, almost cartoony in their shapes to let you know that it's lighthearted and justice will be restored in the end. Absolutely, justice is going to be restored in the end in my books because justice is in the title, but you've got a long, hard, dark road along the way. And so the covers do reflect that. And I also want to say hello and hey to the person that answered that question. I recognize you from Goodreads, so thank you so much for stopping by tonight.
Great. Okay, so the last question we have, they did actually respond that they love hearing the background details on the covers, so that's terrific. So we have one more question here. Sometimes characters evolve from our original visions of them. What about your protagonist surprised you during the writing process? And how about we start with you, Andrea, for that one?
I was really surprised at how snarky she ended up being. And hey there, Suze. Thanks so much for coming. I appreciate you coming as well. I was really surprised at how snarky she was. And as much as I like to tell people that Victoria is absolutely positively not me, because she isn't, I would say if there was one trait that she stole from me or that I managed to give to her, she has the snarkiness is the one that we share, because I wanted her to be, initially, I wanted her to be almost a Mary Sue, not a Mary Sue, because I know that readers get mad about that, but I wanted her to be a very straight-laced character because the people around her were or are so duplicitous. But in viewing that, she ends up just being so snarky in her internal life. And that wasn't something I intended, but it's something that ended up coming from me to the character. And I think it works, because if she's supposed to be seen and not heard, she's got to have a vivid inner life. And if it's all internal, you've got to entertain the reader some way. And that snarkiness is the way to do it. Readers love snark.
How about you, Sung?
I think for me, and it's still something that I don't quite understand or process, is people find Siobhan funny. And I really was not trying to write her as a funny character in the least. And yet I hear that comment a lot. So maybe it's just that she plays the straight woman. I'm not really sure. I try to kind of surround her with more wackier characters. So I think she does actually play the role of a straight woman. But yeah, that's a nice surprise, and one I still don't quite understand, but I'll take it.
Well, I think if I can interrupt on that one, I think part of it is because she's so straightforward. She's never really pulling any punches, and it might be funny just simply because she's telling the straightforward truth, which people aren't used to hearing. So, she's definitely very honestly and obviously herself. So I think that that's part of what contributes to that, and it's just kind of misinterpreted as funny, although she's kind of funny.
Yeah, maybe it's just bluntness.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, so Chantel, like I do every time, what do you have coming up that you're excited about?
Oh, goodness. Okay, so let's see. Next month, June, we have Sirens of Memory, which is the first thriller from Pooja Guha, who wrote the Ahirman Legacy series. And that follows a woman during the attack in Kuwait who has to flee her home and her abusive husband, and ends up taking the identity of a dead Indian refugee in order to move to the US, only to find that her abusive husband has found her after 20 years by coincidence. And then the following book, which is in July, is Dia Poirier's After You Died, which is it's a very fascinating book because it's loosely based on events that happened at this school in Florida called the Dozier Reformatory School, where they found over 200 bodies of young boys buried in the woods after the school closed. And it this boy who's a bisexual teen, his name is Asher, he wakes up one day covered in the blood of his girlfriend, and she's dead, and he has no memory of what could have possibly happened. And he's sent to this reform school where he starts undergoing sessions with a psychiatrist and trying to figure out and unlock his memories. But it seems that this might be tied to incidents in the past and not necessarily his past. So that's July. So
good job with those synopses.
Well, I hope I know what they're about after all of this.
Well done. All right. It is the point in the evening when we're going to wrap up. So thanks to Chantel, thanks to Andrea, and thanks to Sung for being here, and thanks to those of you watching. As always, the link is there in the comments and in the live chat. If you're interested in ordering the books, we would love for you to do that. And I'm just now realizing I think we owe you guys an email about getting the next couple Agora Polis nights set up. So I'm gonna
that's okay. We'll
check in on that.
Totally, I will. And thank you all again, not only for your wonderful books, but always McKenna for hosting us and enduring our nights. So thank you so much.
All right, it's been a pleasure. I'm gonna sign us all off. Good evening.
All right, bye everybody. Thank you so much.
Bye. Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.